To be honest, horror is not my forte. I've never been a huge fan. I just don't get the enjoyment of jump scares, or gore, or slasher, or anything like that. Something, however, drew me to the Little Nightmares games. For one thing, the developers. Tarsier Studios are the same developers partly responsible for the Little Big Planet series on the PlayStation. Creativity-wise, these guys have experience and pedigree, and something about the Tim Burton-esque graphics intrigued me, so I took a punt. With the second of the series having been released last month, I thought I'd play them both and give you my thoughts and feelings on both and compare the two. I've popped timestamps down below so you can jump to my thoughts on the second game if you're not really bothered about my thoughts on the first. So let's start with Little Nightmares 1, released in May 2018 on the Switch. My initial thoughts when I turned on Little Nightmares was, this ain't gonna have a lot of laughs. It's creepy, like super creepy, and dark, like really dark. Little Nightmares is the story of a young yellow-hooded teeny person known as Six, whose main objective is to escape the nightmarish Moor, which is a sort of horror ship. As you work your way through the game, you uncover the real horror of the ship and why Six and others are determined to get away from it. Believe me when I say the realisation of what's going on is truly unforgettable and truly hideous in equal measure. The game runs as a 2.5D puzzle platformer. It's mostly linear in its design, meaning you won't be revisiting old chapters. Instead, you'll be working your way through different areas of the ship with different puzzles to escape. The setting and art style really is the star of the show in this game. It's unsettling and at times uncomfortable, but with a sort of comic, as I said before, Tim Burton-esque atmosphere. The character and setting design have a very individual and particular style, which has a kind of horrifying beauty, really. Background features include hanging bodies, slabs of meat, and sort of queer dolls strewn around. The different areas include a prison type area, a kitchen and a lair. As you would expect on a horror ship with hanging bodies and prisons, darkness is a common enemy throughout the entirety of the game. This darkness is often incorporated into the puzzles, with Six's only real weapon being a small lighter she carries around with her. She's also pretty agile, so she can climb small things, jump and grab edges, so it's great. Many of the puzzles are stealth related, meaning you'll be creeping in the dark to avoid particular nasties. The creepy atmosphere isn't only evident from the setting, but also the horrifying creatures along the way. The game works with an overriding enemy that lingers around and terrorises Six along a particular sector or area. Quite honestly, the creature that gave me the heebie-jeebies more than any other was the first one you meet in the game, the Monstrous Janitor. Apparently his name's Roger. Doesn't look like a Roger. He has these long ghoulish arms to grab Six at the drop of a pin. He's blind but has incredible hearing. The puzzles therefore cater towards quiet, stealth-like movement to avoid Roger and his dangly arms. I won't list all the creatures here, but they are all horrifying and monstrous with a human-like familiarity. All the sections work in a similar way throughout the game. There's an enemy who has some kind of weakness. The puzzles utilise this weakness for you to traverse to the next area. Overall, I thought the puzzles were fun. Considering the limited moveset of Six, Tarsier Studios have done a pretty good job at giving the player unique challenges to keep you on your toes. The most memorable puzzle for me involves Six operating a sausage maker to create some sort of sausage rope for you to swing to the next room. It's brilliant and inventive. It's really cool. Audio-wise, the game does a very good job in matching the uncomfortable setting with an equally uncomfortable and unsettling audio track. From the moment you open up the game, you're greeted by a cliched horror music box twinkling away. Then as you work your way through the game, the sound designers have done an excellent job emphasising creaky floorboards, metal screeching and any other cliche creepy noises to make the player feel ill at ease. There's also an ominous music soundtrack which gets louder and quieter to add a sense of dread. Of course, with any good horror thriller, silence is also utilised very well to increase this sense of dread throughout your experience of the game. In terms of difficulty, there weren't really any areas that troubled me too much. Because each room is only quite small, I found that if I did get stuck, it didn't take too long to solve the issue through simple trial and error. Performance-wise, thankfully the Switch edition performs well. I didn't really feel any dips in how the game ran at any point. However, graphically it's quite easy to notice a kind of blurriness, especially in handheld mode, which is apparently not as evident in the PlayStation or Xbox versions. But to be fair, if any game is going to have a weird, spooky, blurry edge, this is a good one to have it. The blurry visuals almost added to the unique, creepy, unknown aura this game has, whether that be intentional or not. Now, this game is not perfect. There are a few issues. First and foremost is the tricky camera angle. Some ledges and shelves are hard to see in its entirety from your view as the player, which means you'll find yourself falling off things a lot and attaining cheap, what feels like unnecessary deaths. Probably wouldn't have occurred if you had a bit more freedom with a camera. At times it's hard to know exactly the position of 6 in relation to a walkway or an exit, just because of the angle of the camera. It's a bit odd. Second is the loading times. Now, I feel like I've been treated recently with games like Messenger and Super Meat Boy. In these examples, restart is pretty much instantaneous. When you die, you click one button and straight away, try again. Of course, this is a different kind of game with different graphical requirements. However, I found that the load times once you died and when entering new areas almost unacceptable. It actually impairs the horror experience by having to wait so long for the game to reload every time you die. Obviously, this is particularly frustrating if there's an area you're struggling to get past. So as with a short game, the main story only took me about 4 hours to finish, which is a bit of a hard pill to swallow if you've bought it at full price. Then again, if you die enough times, this length would be a lot longer thanks to those load times. Brilliant. What I will say though is since launch, 3 new chapters of the game have been released as DLC named Secrets of the Maw. I won't talk too much about them here, but playing through it it pretty much doubled my playtime. The DLC sees you play as a new character, the Runaway Kid, who's another unfortunate child who finds himself trying to escape the maw. Both aesthetically and gameplay wise, it's very much more of the same, apart from now you can swim, which offers a different puzzle angle. I actually found the DLC much trickier difficulty wise, so it did take me a bit longer to work through it, but it plays very similar and is a very welcome addition to the main story. Also note that there are a number of collectibles throughout the main adventure and the DLC which will add on some playtime if you want to find them, including gnomes to grab, like little gnomes with little hats on, look quite cute, lady statues to smash and lanterns to light along the way through your journey. Overall then, I did have a lot of fun with Little Nightmares. Thankfully, despite my feelings towards the horror genre, Little Nightmares kept me enticed from beginning to end, with an enthralling story and some truly excellent visuals and audio. Also, there weren't really a lot of jump scares, which for me is a big plus. It's more just eerie and almost thriller-like in its design. As I've said, there are a few issues, the dodgy camera angle and the long load times being 2. But for an enthralling story set in a horrifying backdrop, Little Nightmares does a good job. Moving on to Little Nightmares 2. From the get-go you'll notice a couple of differences straight away. One thing's the protagonist. This time, rather than controlling Six, you control Mono, a young boy with a fetching paper bag over his head. His moveset is fairly similar to Six's. He's agile, so he can run, jump and grab onto things. He doesn't have a lighter, which is a shame, but does instead have the ability to pick up larger objects and attack enemies with them. He can also hold objects like keys, for example, without you as the player having to hold onto the ZR button, like you had to in the first game. This is really handy. Overall, however, the controls will be familiar to you if you've played the first game, and if you haven't, well, you'll get used to it pretty quickly. The settings also changed. Rather than waking up in a prison on the moor, you wake up in a creepy forest. Your game sees you move from this creepy forest into a sprawling yet grim metropolis, and then over to like a signal tower. You'll find out why in your playthrough. The setting is, for all sense of purposes, just as grim as the moor, just as dark and disturbing. You won't want a weekend break here anyway. I personally found the story interesting, however I actually did prefer the story element from the first game a little bit more, and that partly is down to the more concentrated setting of the moor. I actually found it gave a more focused story. That being said, Little Nightmares 2 did keep me playing, which really is what a game should be doing. What differs massively between this and the first Little Nightmares is that this game, for the most part, operates as a cooperative experience. Although you control Mono, you'll also have Six working with you for large parts of the game. This gives the game a different mechanic, as often you have to work together to solve certain puzzles and get to new areas. For example, there might be a ledge which is too high to reach. Six has the ability of giving you a leg up. Or if the enemy needs distracting, Six can offer that service as well. At this point I will say it might have been nice to have an option of a multiplayer cooperative mode, but sadly it's not to be. Might also have been nice to have the ability to control both characters, but again that feature's not available here. I will say though that having a second character does differ the story experience from the first, as in that game you're very much a lone soul. This one adds the dynamic of a second personality in the mix. Thankfully the visuals are just as defined and eerie as the first game. The area and character design follows the same palette. A slight difference is the inclusion of outside areas, which I really enjoyed. It gave a new dynamic to some of the puzzles, which I think is great. The inside areas continue to haunt and dumbfound in equal measure. There's an excellent school area and a terrifying hospital, both of which are very memorable. Enemies as well are just as haunting. The school teacher is an enemy I won't forget in a hurry. I do feel this game leads towards horror cliches even more so than the first game. There's static televisions, a dreary horror hospital, moving statues and even an Annabelle-inspired head turn. Audibly again, this game is magnificent, with sound effects such as crows cawing and doors slamming, keeping you alert. The music is full of dread and works flawlessly to create real suspense when it's needed. Again, when the game really wants to build tension, silence is utilised brilliantly to get your heart pumping. Sadly, like Little Nightmares 1, there are a couple of issues which are kinda quite similar to the first game's issues. Notably again the annoying camera. I won't badger on about it, but not having a clear view of platforms or entrances or exits means more cheap and what feels like unnecessary deaths. Thankfully the long load times have been sorted, which is a great relief. Be aware though that a number of times the game's rebooted after a death. There were a couple of glitches in the matrix. It was only brief and I only really noticed it in handheld mode. Didn't really affect the gameplay, but it was noticeable. so just be aware. Another irk for me unique to this game is the reliance on having to attack some enemies throughout the story. One of the best things for me about the first game was the vulnerability of Six having to work her way through this unimaginably horrible world using stealth and brain power alone. Having the ability to directly attack certain enemies takes away some of this enjoyment for me. Also, attacking enemies in this game can be a nightmare in itself. Took me a few times to get through these areas due to how frustratingly slow it is for Mono to swing his weapon. Your timing has to be perfect. Now, I do understand that this is in the design and part of the challenge. I honestly though just found it annoying and it didn't really add anything for me. It was just an inconvenience and didn't add to my enjoyment of the game. Difficulty wise, again, for puzzle veterans, I don't think you're going to find too many issues here. A couple of the puzzles I personally found a little bit tougher than the original, but I'm not really a puzzle expert. Lengthwise, you're looking at a similar, if not ever so slightly longer playtime. Took me about 5 hours to play through the game, however I'm sure that some people out there will finish this a lot quicker. There is also a teeny weeny DLC, the Gnomes Attic, which to be honest is not really a proper DLC. It's a small puzzle incorporated into the game. Chances are you'll complete the DLC without even knowing you've done it, but just know it's there. So my final thoughts on Little Nightmares 2. Well, it's a competent and enjoyable second outing for the Little Nightmares series on the Switch. I thought the visuals and audio, again, impressed from the get-go. Although I thought it was a bit of a missed opportunity multiplayer-wise, I liked the cooperative gameplay between Mono and Six. I thought the puzzles and the enemies were brilliantly terrifying and challenging at times. I'm also very happy they've gotten rid of the ridiculous load times from the first game. A couple of things I'm not so keen on is the move to more action sequences with the ability to attack certain enemies, and the camera issues are still evident at times in this game. Although the story enticed me to carry on, I honestly preferred the way the first game built a story as you were playing the game a little bit more than this one. If I had to rate both of these games, I'd say for different reasons they're 7.5 out of 10 games for me. Obviously this is just my own opinion, so if you don't agree, sorry. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I do really appreciate it. If you liked it, click like and subscribe. Also hit the little bell so you'll be notified about the upcoming videos. Really helps out the channel. Thanks a lot and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.